The 2000 presidential election was one of the closest presidential races we've ever experienced in this country. Although George W. Bush won the election by just 5 electoral votes, it was Al Gore who won the popular vote that year. But when you start to slice and dice the electorate into different voting groups, that race starts to look way less tight. Check this out. In 2000, George W. Bush dramatically outperformed his opponent among white evangelical voters, winning 68% among that group. In 2004, he increased that support by 10 points. Evangelical support for the Republican presidential candidate remained relatively steady for the next 2 elections. And then look what happened in 2016. Donald Trump won the support of 81% of white evangelical voters. Donald Trump's ability to supercharge the evangelical vote has largely been attributed as the reason he was able to win the presidency the first time he ran. Without a strong evangelical turnout, it becomes much more difficult for Donald Trump to chart a repeat path to the presidency, which is why headlines like these today are a 5-alarm fire for the Trump campaign. Quote, why evangelicals are upset at recent Trump and Vance statements on abortion. The last 24 hours have laid bare the challenges of running the first Republican campaign for president in 50 years, in an America where abortion is not a guaranteed constitutional right. In addition to voting for president this November, Florida will also vote on whether abortion access should be protected in their state up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. Right now, abortion is illegal after just 6 weeks, which is before most women even suspect that they could be pregnant. Last night, Donald Trump, who himself is a Florida voter, told NBC News that he believes the 6-week ban in his state is, quote, too short. He said when he votes in November, he'll be, quote, voting that we need more than 6 weeks, which seemed to imply that he would be voting to protect abortion access in Florida. In that same interview, Donald Trump announced that if he's elected to a second term, he would find a way to fund IVF treatment for all people struggling with infertility, which is the newest target of the evangelical anti-abortion sect of the hard right. And so that 1-2 punch from Donald Trump, his apparent newfound support for abortion and IVF, has set off a firestorm among the evangelical conservatives that Trump needs to win the election. Last night, the president of an influential anti-abortion group called Donald Trump personally. According to NBC News, she was calling to ask to clarify whether or not he had suddenly decided to support abortion. She told Trump, quote, it's imperative that you're clear because there's confusion now that you may be in support of this. And the consequences of that confusion are already playing out. The president of anti-abortion student groups says volunteers are refusing now to knock on doors for Donald Trump if his stance on abortion is not, quote, corrected. That visceral response from the far right today has sent the Trump campaign into a kind of tailspin as they attempted to backtrack on Trump's pro-abortion comments. In the last few hours, Trump himself said that regardless of whatever he said yesterday, he does intend to vote against the Florida ballot measure that would increase abortion access in his state. But will that be enough to satisfy his evangelical base? The danger here is not that these voters will suddenly decide to run and vote for Kamala Harris. The danger is that all of Trump's flip-flopping and flailing and talking out of both sides of his mouth has caused his base to believe that he's really not the anti-abortion warrior he promised to be, and that instead of turning out to vote for him on November 5th, they're just going to stay home. Joining us now is McKay Coppin, staff writer at The Atlantic. McKay, I want to thank you for being here. This is a really important conversation, right? Because Trump, I believe, made that promise and said, I'm going to give you Supreme Court justices. I'm going to overturn Roe v. Wade. He takes so much pride in the fact that he successfully got Roe v. Wade overturned. And yet, when push comes to shove in the span of 24 hours, he cannot take a consistent position on abortion.
Yeah, I think that is really striking. And I think it's important to understand the context here, right? In 2016, conservative evangelicals essentially made what a lot of them realized was a Faustian bargain by getting behind Trump, right? Most of them, if they were being honest with themselves, and many of them even said so outright, knew that Donald Trump was not an especially righteous or godly man. They knew that he was even probably not a really pro-life person, right? Like he had a long track record of talking about abortion in fairly moderate or even liberal terms. But they made this calculation in 2016 that he would owe them if they showed up for him, right? If they delivered him the presidency, he would deliver for them by appointing conservative justices to the court who would overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, he basically did deliver on his promise in 2016, right? The conservative evangelicals that I've talked to up until about, a year or two ago would say, we made this bet and it paid off massively, right? But now they see Donald Trump waffling on this issue. He's talking about subsidizing IVF for all women in America. He's talking about leaving abortion to the states. And in this next front of the battle over abortion, the pro-life movement is seeing that Donald Trump is not nearly as committed as they thought he was. And not only that, they can't control him in the way that they thought they could. And that, I think, is what is delivering a lot of this consternation on the pro-life right. Like these people thought that they had him under their thumb, and now they're not so sure. And I think that's where the division is coming from, and that's why you're hearing so much angst from a lot of these pro-life voices.
McKay, it's got to be such an insult to their intelligence, though, this evangelical base of voters, that Trump suggests, if not outright says, that he can play them. He can promise one thing, do another. I don't even think inconsistent is the right adjective for him, because when he goes out and he promises kind of Oprah style, you get a car, well, you get IVF and you get IVF. And yet, not to make light of it, fetal personhood is a very real thing for the evangelical base. And they have made it clear that IVF challenges their beliefs because even though, yes, they are, quote, pro-life, they have a concern about what's happening to the eggs, the embryos that are created during this IVF process. And so do you think that there's enough here, enough meat on the bone for the evangelical base to say, you know what, I am an intelligent voter and I'm not going to be played by you, Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to who has the power, who has the upper hand in this kind of arranged marriage between the social conservative movement and Donald Trump, right? I think a lot of social conservatives believed up until recently that they were the ones pulling the strings. And look, I think that they still have a case to make here. The fact that Donald Trump has flipped on the Florida abortion law suggests that they still do have some power and they're flexing that muscle there. But at the end of the day, like if these voters don't believe that Donald Trump is going to deliver for them anymore, and they see him out there courting moderate swing voters who are more pro-choice, who are pro-IVF, I could see a situation where at least some of them decide to stay home. I heard it even in my reporting over the summer with the evangelical right. A lot of them have talked themselves into this idea over the past 8 years that Donald Trump is not only kind of a blunt instrument in God's hand, but that he truly is God's champion. And you hear it in the prayers that are delivered at his rallies. You hear it in some of the rhetoric that his evangelical supporters used in talking about him. I will say that rhetoric will evaporate very quickly if these people believe that Donald Trump is going to advance any kind of pro-choice policies. And if they start to believe that he is not actually on their side, if he's not going to do their bidding, those voters will stay home. They're not going to vote for Democrats, but they're not going to vote for him either.
I'm probably going to misquote the scripture here, McKay, but what is it? Beware of false idols. Maybe that's apropos here. McKay Coppins, thanks for being here and getting us started in this hour. I appreciate you.